You want me to put that on my tudger?
Harry's wife. Netflix will drop them. Spotify have got rid, and it didn't go very well. Not only is it the case that they're getting a fraction of the money that they thought they would be receiving, they've been roundly panned in terms of work ethic and being labelled as fucking grifters. But it doesn't end there. With the foundation of their finances taking a bit of a hammering as a consequence of the loss of the Spotify deal, the next suggestion is, could Netflix follow? And Dan Wooten of Daily Mail believes that they will. He states, Taylor Swift's brutal rejection of Harry's wife's plea to appear on her podcast proves stars want proximity to real royals, not the bitter Sussexes. That's why I'm told Harry and his wife will be dropped by Netflix next. If that is the case and they're dropped by Netflix, that will be a huge hammer blow to Harry's wife. Not only will the act of dropping her wound her, and it would likely be done by what is regarded as a secondary source in her fuel matrix, the problem is the amplification thereafter. Take you, for example. If you were dismissed from your job and you were a narcissist, that would wound you. The loss of the job. There would then also be the loss of a residual benefit, the income that comes from it. But it might be the case that only a handful of people know about your dismissal. Your colleagues, maybe one or two family members, your partner. And therefore, when they bring it up, it would present some challenge fuel. But what you don't have is a world media all commenting on, poring over, reporting on the fact that you've lost something. Accordingly, a lower scale narcissist, if I can describe it that way, would be wounded, and it would be substantial wounding as a consequence of the loss of their employment. However, the amplification of that would be minimal because they don't have that larger fuel matrix, and they're not prominent. But for Harry's wife, if, as Mr. Wooten predicts, she is going to lose the Netflix contract, then not only does that wound her, and there is the loss of the residual benefit, dependent upon how much money is no longer going to be paid to them that they were counting on, but there then comes the biggest problem from that, worldwide reporting, worldwide commenting from people about it. And that would generate threat to control after threat to control after threat to control, which Harry's wife's narcissism will of course deal with by suggesting that it wasn't her fault, that perhaps by considering taking legal action against Netflix, by putting out a statement saying that it was to enable her to move on to more exciting projects, that she's in discussions with other platforms, yada, yada, yada. But the fact is that if Spotify and Netflix don't think you're any good, is there anybody else really going to gamble on you? No. Footballers move around clubs often. It's an established aspect. Some instances, they have a lateral move from one club in the Premiership to another, and then as they get older and they become less able, they slide down the divisions if they haven't decided to retire at the top. But that's expected, and clubs are willing to pay not as much as that player was paid in the Premiership, but they will still pay them because at that lower level they're still able to do a job. They've got oodles of experience that they can share. Sometimes it doesn't work out. The individual is just seen as a mercenary. But it isn't the case that that individual is viewed as a failure, but rather they're viewed as having proved themselves at the highest level, and as time marches on and they become a little bit slower, that they don't perhaps make the decisions as fast as they once did, the body not able to respond in the way that it did, they can still put it in a shift, and they have something that's worth paying for. But that's the point with Harry's wife. She doesn't have anything that's worth paying for. A written rebuke from Taylor Swift, Mr. Wooten writes, can be a bitter pill with grave consequences to one's reputation. Just ask her famous ex-boyfriends, John Mayer, Joe Jonas and Harry Styles. But in the case of Harry's wife, it's somewhat ironic that it's the lack of a note from the undisputed Queen of American entertainment that was enough to represent the end of the Queen of Victimhood's Hollywood dream. It has emerged that Harry's wife had penned a personal letter, no doubt in calligraphy, asking Taylor to appear on her soon-to-flop podcast, Archetypes. the pop megastar declined, but significantly, not via personal note back to the desperate Duchess. See parts passive for my analysis of this. Nope. The rejection came from a representative, as if Taylor was turning down just another interview with one of the countless TV shows, podcasts, or tabloid newspapers who make bids on a regular basis. Since Spotify's $20 million deal with Harry and Harry's wife came to an end last week, we have learned just how ill-equipped the couple were for a real job that required hard graft, imagination, and strong working relationships. But it's also become obvious how the pair's little black book of contacts they were convinced would pull through for them in their moment of financial need is far thinner than they ever wanted to believe. Hollywood celebrities and American A-listers loved Harry and Harry's wife when they were members of the British royal family. As bitter and twisted grenade throwers on a kamikaze mission to bring down the monarchy, even as the highly respected late Queen and Prince Philip were close to death, not so much. Being publicly associated with Harry and Harry's wife on a work project is not worth the potential brand damage for any bona fide A-star, particularly one like Swift, who has spent years building up a working relationship with Prince William, who represents the future of the royals. Not to mention former allies like the Obamas, who still hold genuine political clout in the liberal US circles. Harry's wife, who still has the unshakable confidence to believe she could one day end up in the Oval Office herself, covets. That's part of the reason why I'm convinced Netflix is now desperate to follow Spotify out the door and sever their former $100 million deal with the Sussexes when it expires in 2025. A senior Hollywood source told me, Netflix wants out too. They are envious the Spotify exit could come so quickly. The contract with Harry and Harry's wife hasn't delivered. It's been a nightmare to navigate from start to finish. Such as a ruthless end to the couple's desire to launch an entertainment empire might seem savage, but they only have themselves to blame. In the early overtures between both companies and the Sussexes, executives were led to believe they had Britain's answers to the Kardashians on their hands, albeit with more of a left-wing political motivation, which suited their woke new employers just fine. The couple were prepared to get their hands dirty, put themselves personally at the heart of the various projects and appear regularly on screen. But Netflix and Spotify were sold a dud. The reality is that, even now as huge stars, the Kardashians work really hard. They've grafted for their big new Disney contract and understand the expectations of what's required in terms of access to their lives in exchange for such a monumental deal. In stark contrast, Spotify and Netflix got Dippy Harry and Difficult Harry's wife, the masters of big ideas and even bigger promises, which almost certainly never come to fruition. As the Wall Street Journal reported, Archewell employees and associates say the company often lacks direction and that its founders at times seem surprised by the work required to finish entertainment projects. In Harry's case, his search for a podcast to host became farcical. His completely impractical and impossible to deliver ideas, including interviewing Vladimir Putin, Mark Zuckerberg and Donald Trump about childhood trauma, and Pope Francis about religion, according to Bloomberg. He reportedly even considered co-hosting a show with the lefty comedian Hassan Minhaj, who emerged on the satirical Daily Show, but that never eventuated either. It's not as if Spotify didn't try to get things going. They even helped build a studio in the couple's enormous Monty Shitshow mansion, of which their contract helped secure their mega mortgage. In exchange, they had Harry's wife hounding the company's top executives with requests for last-minute changes to her own podcast. In other words, she was every broadcaster's worst nightmare. At one point, Harry and Harry's wife are said to have even pitched a vague TV project tackling misinformation. How deliciously ironic. The only misinformation that ended up emanating from this deal was the Sussexes' claim they'd be creative masterminds deserving of being handed tens of millions of dollars by producing stellar and compelling entertainment shows and podcasts. Just like the royal family discovered, working with these two provides no end of headaches and very little in terms of benefits. Meanwhile, Prince William has launched one of the most audacious social projects ever tackled by a royal, with the goal of ending homelessness in 5 years. It's risky, daring and high stakes. Exactly the sort of public service mission you could have thought Harry and Harry's wife could have championed through the unprecedented reach provided to them by the biggest streaming platforms in the world. But as Taylor Swift once opined, with Netflix preparing to join Spotify and pulling the plug, that option is gonna go down in flames. Thus, Mr. Wooten reports that he believes that Netflix will pull the plug also. Certainly, if you were viewing it objectively, in terms of what they've provided so far and what they're likely to provide, means that the pulling of the plug is in all likelihood going to happen. And when that does occur, it's going to cause wounding for Harry's wife, a loss of a major residual benefit, and repeated wounding and challenge thereafter as a consequence of the fact that so many people were reporting on this downfall. The downward spiral picks up pace. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.